My name is Jimmy Wilcox, 72 years old, and I never thought I'd live to see the day my own son would sell the very farm my father and I built with our bare hands. He didn't just take the land. He tried to take my dignity, handing me eviction papers like I was some stranger passing through. I'm telling you this story because some of you know exactly how it feels to be betrayed by the very person you trusted most. So, settle in, because you're about to hear how it all unfolded. And before we start, tell me where you're watching from in the comments. And don't forget to hit subscribe so you don't miss the next story. I never thought I'd live to see the day when my own son would stand in my driveway, holding papers that said, I no longer owned the land my father and I worked for half a century. But there he was, Jake Wilcox, my flesh and blood, wearing that smug little smirk he must have practiced in the mirror, leaning against a shiny black truck that probably cost more than my first house. Just sign, Dad. Don't make this harder than it needs to be, he said, like he was negotiating a business deal with some stranger instead of talking to the man who raised him. The air was hot, that heavy Texas kind of hot that presses down on you like a punishment. My hands were trembling, not from the heat, but from the rage building inside me. I looked past him toward the barn, the old red one with peeling paint, the one my wife and I danced in the night we bought this place. Behind it, the oak tree stood tall, the same one where Jake used to play as a boy, back before money and greed dug their claws into his soul. This is my land, I told him, my voice low but sharp. My name's still on the deed. Not anymore, he shot back. You've been dragging your feet for years. It's time to move on. The buyers are already lined up. They offered more than it's worth, Dad. This is a win for everyone. Everyone. That word hit me like a shovel to the gut. Because when Jake said everyone, he didn't mean me. He meant himself, his wife, and whatever dream of a shiny city life they thought this deal would buy them. I glanced toward the porch. Martha, my second wife, was standing there, her lips pressed tight, her eyes darting between us. She wanted to step in, but she knew better. Jake had been turning on the charm with her for months, painting this picture of helping me out and taking responsibility for my future. She didn't realize the future he was talking about didn't have me in it. The papers in his hand rustled in the breeze, taunting me. You can fight it, he said with a shrug, but I'll drag this through the courts. And you know how that ends? It wasn't just arrogance, it was certainty. He'd already made moves I didn't even know about. And that's when I realized this wasn't some spur-of-the-moment betrayal. This was planned, cold, deliberate. He'd been building this trap for a long time. For a moment, I just stood there, staring at the house, the land, the horizon beyond the pastures. The sound of cicadas hummed like static in my ears. Every inch of this soil had my sweat in it, my father's too. My mother's cooking still seemed to drift from that kitchen window. Every Sunday dinner, every Christmas morning, every hard day's work was buried here under the dirt. And now my son, my own son, was trying to strip it away like it was just another asset to liquidate. Jake, I said slowly, looking him dead in the eyes, do you even remember the day I put this farm in both our names? His jaw tightened. He knew where I was going. I did that so you'd have security, so you'd never have to wonder where your home was. And now, you're using it to push me out? Things change, Dad, he said coldly. You can't work it anymore. You're just holding on to something that's dying. That word again, dying. He didn't know the first thing about what was dying here. Something inside me went quiet then, that dangerous kind of quiet. I realized this wasn't the end of the fight. It was just the start. I stepped closer, close enough that he had to look up at me despite that arrogant stance. You think you've got this all figured out, boy. But you have no idea what I'm capable of when someone tries to take what's mine. For the first time, I saw it. a flicker of doubt in his eyes. But it was gone just as quick. He shoved the papers toward me again. "Sign it, or I'll make sure you regret it." I didn't take them. I didn't even touch them. I just turned and walked back toward the porch, my boots grinding into the dirt. Martha reached for my arm, whispering, "Jimmy, please." But I didn't answer. My eyes were on the fields, stretching out toward the sunset, glowing gold in the fading light. That's when I made the silent promise. If my son wanted to turn this into a war, I'd make sure he learned what it felt like to lose more than land. Because there's a thing Jake never learned about me. I don't start fights, but I don't lose them either. And as the cicadas sang louder in the evening air, I felt something else. An old, stubborn fire I hadn't felt in years. I was about to take everything he thought he'd won and make him choke on it. But this didn't start here, in the driveway with my son holding those papers. No, this started long before, when small cracks began to form in our family. Cracks I ignored. Cracks that turned into deep, ugly fractures I couldn't fix. Let me take you back, before the papers, before the threats, to the day I should have seen it coming. People like to say a father's love is unconditional, but the truth is, love still needs to be fed. You can't raise a child just on the sweat of your brow. You have to give them your time, your heart, your everything. And I did. Lord knows I did. This farm wasn't just my livelihood. It was my family's anchor. My father built the first barn with his own 2 hands in '49, before I was even born. When I turned 15, he put a hammer in mine and said, "You want something to last, Jimmy? You build it yourself, nail by nail." I carried that lesson my whole life. When my first wife, Clara, and I married, this was the only place I wanted to raise a family. Jake was our only child. For years, it was just the 3 of us, me, Clara, and the boy, out here working the land. Mornings started before the sun rose, breakfasts were hearty, and evenings ended with stories on the porch. Jake learned to ride a horse before he could ride a bike. He used to beg to go out with me during planting season, running behind the tractor, waving like he was chasing the wind. I gave him more than my father gave me. Not just land, but opportunity. Paid for his schooling, bought him his first truck when he turned 16, even let him skip the harder chores during high school so he could focus on football. That boy never worked a dawn-to-dusk harvest unless I asked for help. And even then, I never made him stay longer than he wanted. I thought that was love. I thought I was giving him a better life. But love can spoil a person if you're not careful. The first signs were small. Jake started acting like the farm was an obligation instead of a gift. When Clara died, God rest her soul, he was already 25 and living in Dallas, working some sales job that barely paid for his apartment. He came home for the funeral, stayed a few weeks to help me get things in order, then left as soon as he could. For the first time, I saw something in his eyes I couldn't place. Not grief, not even indifference. It was like he'd decided he was too good for this place. I remarried a couple years later. Martha, a kind-hearted woman I met at church. She was a blessing in my old age. But Jake never warmed to her. He was polite enough to her face, but I could see the distance. He stopped calling as much. And when he did, the conversations were all about him. His career moves, his friends, his new condo. When I'd talk about the farm, I'd hear that tone in his voice, the one that said he was humoring me. One Thanksgiving, maybe 5 years back, he brought a girlfriend named Vanessa. She was all city, heels in the mud, manicure flashing like a warning light. The first thing she said when she walked through the door was, "So, this is it? The famous Wilcox farm?" Not a compliment. More like she was walking through an exhibit. I remember the way Jake looked at her when she wrinkled her nose at the smell of the barn. It wasn't shame. It was agreement. That was the first time I felt a pit in my stomach about him. After that, his visits grew shorter. He'd stop by for holidays, bring a gift, something expensive and shiny, like a Bluetooth speaker I'd never use, and then disappear before dessert. I started noticing a strange thing. When he was here, he'd wander the property with his phone out, taking pictures. I asked him once why, and he just said, "Oh, just showing some buddies back in Dallas." Then came the suggestions. At first, they were subtle. "Dad, you could make a lot if you sold just a few acres." Or, "Ever think about retiring to the city? Less work, more comfort." I brushed them off, thinking he was just concerned about my age. But the suggestions turned into nudges, the nudges into pressure. One summer, he showed up with a man in a suit, a friend he wanted me to meet. Said he specialized in rural property valuation. I told them both they could turn right back around. That night, Jake called me stubborn, said I was clinging to the past and holding us both back. That "us" stuck with me. I didn't know then that he meant it in the most selfish way possible. Martha, bless her, tried to keep the peace. "He's just looking out for you," she'd say, pouring me coffee. But she didn't see the way he looked around this place, like he was already measuring what it was worth in dollars, not memories. Then came the small humiliation. Like the Christmas, he gave me a cruise ticket to finally see the world, but scheduled it for the middle of calving season. Or the birthday he sent me a pair of cufflinks, for a man who wears denim and flannel 6 days a week. I could tell he didn't know me anymore, or maybe he didn't care to. The last straw before everything tipped came on a Sunday afternoon 2 years ago. He'd been unusually friendly all morning, helping me fix the fence near the north pasture. Around lunchtime, he leaned on the post, wiped his brow, and said, "You know, Dad, you can't work this place forever. What happens if you, I don't know, drop dead out here?" I stared at him, waiting for a laugh, a sign he was joking. It never came. He just looked at me with that calculating gaze, like he was thinking about insurance payouts, not my health. I didn't say anything then, but the chill in my bones stayed long after he left. The thing is, family betrayal doesn't happen all at once. It's a slow leak. You ignore it at first, patch it with good intentions, convince yourself they'll come around. But eventually, you realize the whole damn tire's flat, and you've been riding on the rim for years. Looking back now, I can see it plain as day. The small comments, the city girlfriends, the property valuations, the photos. He'd been laying the groundwork all along. The last time before the storm, he came to me with a business proposal. Said there was a developer interested in turning part of the land into luxury ranch-style retreats. He painted it like it was a win-win. They'd keep the charm, pay top dollar, and I could still live here on a smaller portion. I told him no, flat out. His smile tightened like a wire. That night, as I was locking up the barn, I saw him through the window of his truck. He was on the phone, talking low, but I caught one sentence clear as a bell. "Don't worry. He'll cave. He always does." That was the moment I knew something was coming. Something I wouldn't like. It happened on a Tuesday morning in late spring. The kind of day where the sun comes up gentle, the air smells like fresh-cut hay, and you think maybe, just maybe, life's still good. I was halfway through fixing the irrigation line when I heard engines on the gravel road. Not just one, several. Trucks, SUVs, a car or two. At first, I figured maybe Martha had company coming from church, but the sight that rolled up to my gate wasn't anything friendly. 3 black SUVs parked side by side, their doors swinging open like something out of a bad TV drama. Out stepped Jake, in a tailored suit, sunglasses hiding his eyes. Behind him came 2 men in sharp city-style clothes with clipboards and folders under their arms. A third man had a camera slung around his neck. And trailing them all was a shiny red pickup, its driver none other than that property valuation fellow I'd run off years ago. The pit in my stomach started before a single word was spoken. Jake didn't even look around at the fields. He looked straight at me, like he'd been rehearsing this moment. "Morning, Dad," he said, too casual. "We're here to finalize things." "Finalize what?" I asked, though my gut already knew. He pulled a folder from under his arm and handed it to one of the clipboard men, who stepped forward and held it out to me. "The sale's complete. You're no longer the legal owner of the Wilcox farm." I didn't take the papers. I just stared at him. "The hell I'm not. My name's on that deed." Jake's smirk had the kind of confidence only paperwork and greed can give a man. "Was, Dad. You signed it over to me years ago when you put me on as co-owner. Remember? I've exercised my rights as majority stakeholder. Well, technically you're a guest now." The words sliced clean through me. My mouth went dry. "Majority stakeholder? I never—" "You did when you let me buy that old equipment off you for the North Field," he interrupted. "You remember, right? That transaction shifted ownership percentages." I did remember, vaguely. He'd offered me a decent price for a couple of tractors and some tools I didn't use much anymore. I thought it was a nice gesture, a way for him to have more skin in the game. I didn't know it was a legal maneuver. "You planned this," I said, voice low. "I planned for your future," he shot back, like I should be grateful. The man with the camera started snapping photos of the house, the barn, even my old pickup. I stepped toward him, but one of the clipboard men moved between us. "Mr. Wilcox," he said, "as per the terms of the sale, you have 60 days to vacate the premises. The buyers are eager to begin development." "Development?" My head snapped toward Jake. "You sold it to developers?" "They made the best offer," Jake said, as if that settled the matter. "Luxury ranch properties. It's going to be beautiful, and you'll get a share of the profits, of course. Enough to set you up comfortably, like I was some old horse he was sending off to pasture." The neighbors must have noticed the commotion because, before long, a couple of them had pulled over by the gate. One of them, Bill Thompson, leaned out his window and called, "Everything all right, Jimmy?" Jake turned and waved like he was a politician kissing babies. "Just a change in ownership, Bill. Big things coming for the Wilcox place." The humiliation burned hotter than the Texas sun overhead. My neighbors, the people I'd known for decades, were watching me get stripped of my life in broad daylight. I wanted to yell, to fight, to throw those papers in the dirt, and tell Jake he'd have to drag me off this land in chains. But I also knew something else. Yelling wouldn't change a damn thing. Not right now. Martha came running down from the porch, apron still on, flour dusting her hands. "Jake, what's going on? What is all this?" He softened his voice for her, the way he always did. "It's just business, Martha. Dad's going to be taken care of. We'll find him a nice place closer to town." "I don't want a nice place closer to town," I snapped. "Well," Jake said, his smile tightening, "it's not really your decision anymore." The clipboard man cleared his throat. "Mr. Wilcox, we'll need you to sign these acknowledgement forms so the 60-day notice is official." I didn't take them. Instead, I looked at Jake. Really looked at him. The boy I'd taught to ride a horse. The kid I'd stayed up with all night when he had a fever. The young man I'd bailed out when he got into trouble with credit cards. And now, here he was, cutting me out of my own life, like I was just another obstacle. "How much?" I asked quietly. Jake blinked. "What? How much did they give you for this land?" He hesitated, just for a second, before saying, "Enough." And in that hesitation, I saw it. The greed, the justifications, the belief that what he'd done was not only acceptable, but smart. The men behind him started talking about timelines, surveyors, demolition crews. Their words blurred into white noise as my eyes drifted toward the field. The tall grass swayed in the breeze, like it had 100 times before. The old oak tree stood firm, roots deep in the same soil my father tilled. None of it knew it had been sold. None of it cared about contracts or stakeholders. 60 days. That's what they were giving me to pack up 72 years of life. Bill drove off, shaking his head. I could imagine what he'd tell the others. Jimmy Wilcox lost the farm. sold out by his own son. The men finally left, their vehicles kicking up a cloud of dust down the road. Only Jake lingered, leaning against his truck with his hands in his pockets. "You'll thank me one day," he said. I didn't answer. He started his engine, rolled down the window, and called out, "60 days, Dad." Don't make it harder than it has to be. When the dust settled, the silence felt heavier than it should have. Martha stood beside me, her hand on my arm, but I couldn't look at her. My eyes were fixed on the horizon, where the land met the sky. It was gone. Not just the property, the legacy, the promise I'd carried since my father first put a hammer in my hand, and somewhere deep inside, something shifted. I didn't say it out loud, didn't need to. But as I stood there in the dirt, I knew this story wasn't over. Not by a long shot. For a few days after that Tuesday, I let the dust settle. Both the literal dust from those SUVs and the kind that had kicked up inside my chest. I went about my chores like nothing had changed, though each task now carried a bitter taste. Fixing the fence, feeding the cattle, checking the irrigation line. They were all ghosts of the life I'd had. Jake didn't call, didn't visit, and I didn't expect him to. He probably thought the hard part was over. In his mind, I'd be spending the next 60 days sulking and slowly packing my things. That was his first mistake. See, you don't spend 72 years in one place without knowing every corner, every quirk, every loophole in the way it runs. And you sure don't get to my age without learning how to survive a storm, even if it means you've got to be the one who starts it. It began with the mail. Most folks don't know this, but a farm like mine runs on more paperwork than a small city office. Permits, tax records, grazing leases, water rights. And then there's the co-op agreements with neighboring ranchers. I'd always kept them in good standing. Jake had no idea half of them even existed. One morning, I drove into town to see my old friend Harold, who ran the county clerk's office. Harold's the kind of man who remembers every handshake, every favor, and every debt. And he still owed me for pulling him out of a ditch during the flood of '92. I brought him coffee and a bear claw, sat down across his desk, and told him I needed a look at every document tied to the Wilcox property. He raised an eyebrow. "Bit late for that, isn't it, Jimmy?" "Never too late to know where you stand," I said. By the time I left, I had a thick folder under my arm, and something else, a thread, and I knew if I pulled it just right, the whole sweater might start to unravel. Turns out, the farm's water rights were in my name alone. They'd never been transferred when I added Jake as co-owner. Without those rights, no developer could legally pump a drop for construction, landscaping, or anything else they had in mind. That was my first lever. The next stop was the First Agricultural Bank, where I'd kept my accounts for decades. The loan on the North Pasture, the same one Jake used in his business proposal years back, was technically still active, paid on a monthly schedule through an auto-debit from my account. I walked in and canceled the payment plan. The loan would default in 30 days without that money. And since Jake now held majority ownership, that default would fall squarely on him. I didn't tell Martha much, just that I was sorting through old business. She didn't press, though she gave me that long look of hers, the one that said she knew more than I thought. 2 weeks later, Jake came storming up the driveway in that shiny black truck. I was mending a gate when he jumped out. "Why the hell did I just get a notice from the bank?" he barked. I wiped my hands on my jeans. "Probably because you own the loan now. Congratulations." His jaw worked. "You need to reinstate the payments, Dad. This could hold up the sale." "Could it?" I asked, feigning innocence. His eyes narrowed. "Don't play dumb with me." I didn't answer, just went back to tightening the wire. The silence stretched until he muttered something under his breath and stalked off. That was the first time I saw him rattled. The next week, I went a step further. I made a few calls to the neighboring ranchers in our grazing co-op. Told them about the new owners and how they might not respect the old agreements. The rumor mill in small towns works faster than any internet connection. By the end of the week, half the co-op had decided to pause their contracts until they saw how things played out. Without those agreements, the land's valuation would drop, and so would the developer's enthusiasm. Jake called me that Friday. His voice was tight, controlled. "Dad, we need to talk about this co-op nonsense." "I don't know what you mean," I said, stirring my coffee. "You know exactly what I mean. Word's getting around that the buyers are untrustworthy. That's not helping anybody." "Guess they'll have to earn the trust back," I said, and hung up before he could reply. Each small move was like placing a stone in a dam. One by one, they started holding back the current he'd set in motion. He still thought this was just me being difficult, dragging my feet out of spite. That was his second mistake. The real win came a few days later, when Harold from the clerk's office called. "Jimmy, you'll want to know. That developer filed a request for the water rights transfer." I put it in the needs owner's signature pile. "And whose signature would that be?" I asked, though I already knew. "Yours." I drove down that afternoon, signed the request. Then, in the comments section, I added one line: "Transfer contingent upon satisfactory completion of prior agreements and approval from existing co-op members." In plain English, it meant, nothing moves forward until I say so. When Jake found out, he showed up at the farm again, pacing like a caged animal. "What's your game here?" he demanded. I looked him straight in the eye. "No game, son. Just making sure things are done right. You're sabotaging this deal." "Am I?" I let the question hang. His face flushed, but he didn't answer. That night, I sat on the porch as the sun went down. The fields bathed in gold. Martha brought me a glass of sweet tea and asked, "Are you enjoying this?" I thought about it. About the way Jake's voice had gone tight. The way his confidence had cracked just enough for me to see the man underneath. The man who wasn't nearly as sure of himself as he pretended to be. "I wouldn't say enjoying," I said slowly, "but I am remembering a few things." "Like what?" I looked out at the land, the barn, the oak tree. "Like the fact that I'm not out of moves yet." And right then, as the cicadas started their evening chorus, I felt it. That shift. That old fire. Steady and bright. The first round was mine. That's when I remembered. I still had something left. Jake wasn't the kind of man to let control slip without clawing for it. 2 weeks after my first wins, the fight came to my doorstep. Literally. It was early morning, the kind of cool Texas dawn that makes the grass smell sweet. I was sipping coffee on the porch when a silver Lexus rolled up the drive. Out stepped a woman in a dark blazer, heels clicking on the gravel like she was walking into a boardroom. She introduced herself as Angela Ross, Jake's legal counsel. She didn't waste time. "Mr. Wilcox, your actions are in direct violation of the sale agreement and are considered obstruction. If you continue, you could face legal penalties, including eviction before the 60-day deadline." I leaned back in my chair. "Is that so?" She opened her folder and laid out a neat stack of documents. "You've disrupted the co-op contracts, interfered with the buyer's rights, and stalled necessary transfers. This behavior is damaging the sale and constitutes bad faith." "Bad faith?" I repeated, tasting the words like something sour. "Jake has been more than patient," she went on. "He's offering you a generous settlement to vacate within 30 days. That way, we can avoid the courts." I almost laughed. Generous. That word must have been in the same dictionary as comfortable, the one Jake liked to throw around. I didn't take the papers. Instead, I asked her one question. "Does Jake know you're here?" Her lips pressed into a thin smile. "This is in his best interest." That told me all I needed. Jake wasn't just rattled. He was desperate enough to send someone else to do his bidding. After she left, I drove into town. Not to the bank, not to Harold, but to a small diner on the edge of Main Street. There, in the corner booth, sat Tommy Hensley, a man Jake probably hadn't thought about in years. Tommy and I went way back. His father and mine had run cattle together in the 60s. But, more importantly, Tommy had once worked as a land surveyor for the county. He knew every property line, every easement, every oddball clause that could trip up a developer. Over black coffee, I slid him a folded piece of paper. It was a copy of an agreement my father had drawn up in 1971, back when land boundaries were as much about handshakes as they were about signatures. This particular document covered a 5-acre strip of land on the north edge of the farm, running along the creek. My father had bought it separately from a neighbor and never officially tied it into the main farm deed. It had always been Wilcox's land, but technically, it was a different parcel. Tommy read it, then grinned. So this 5 acres ain't part of the sale? Not a bit. And guess where the developer's access road is supposed to go? His grin widened. Right through it. That was the twist I'd been sitting on since before Jake even drove up with those papers. I hadn't planned to use it. Not until now. But sometimes you've got to show a man that the ground under his feet isn't as solid as he thinks. We filed the paperwork that afternoon to reassert my sole ownership of the creek parcel. Tommy knew exactly how to word it, so it was airtight. By the time Jake found out, the title would be locked down tighter than Fort Knox. A few days later, the fight escalated. Jake showed up unannounced again, this time with a realtor in tow and a photographer. They marched right onto the property, snapping pictures of the house, barn, and fields. "What's this?" I asked, stepping out from the barn. "Marketing," Jake said shortly. "We're moving forward whether you like it or not." "Careful not to get any shots of the creek land," I said. He froze. "What?" I pointed toward the north pasture. "That 5 acres by the creek? Not yours. Never was. Your buyers can't touch it without my say-so. Might want to tell your photographer to keep his lens pointed somewhere else." Jake's realtor glanced at him, confused. "I thought the whole property—" Jake cut her off. "We'll discuss it later." I didn't press. Just let the silence work on him. That night, my phone rang. It was Jake. His voice was sharp, angry. "You think you're clever, old man? You're just making this harder on yourself." "Am I?" I said, keeping my tone even. "You're risking everything for a piece of land you can't even use." I let a beat pass. "Funny thing about land, Jake. Sometimes it's not about using it. Sometimes it's about keeping the wrong hands off it." He swore under his breath and hung up. The creek parcel had always been a point of pride for my father. He used to take me fishing there, just the two of us. One evening, when I was about 15, we were sitting on the bank watching the fireflies when he said, "Jimmy, you keep this land close. Folks will try to take what's easy. But this is leverage. One day, you might need it." At the time, I didn't understand. It was just a strip of grass and water to me. But my father had lived through more than one land grab, and he knew the value of something other people wanted but couldn't touch. I never thought I'd use it against my own son. But then, I never thought my own son would put me in this position. The real fun came a week later. Jake called another meeting with the developers, this time at a fancy restaurant in Dallas. I showed up uninvited, wearing my best jacket, and walked right to their table. "Evening, gentlemen," I said. Jake's face drained of color. "Dad, what are you—" I held up a folder. "Before you keep pouring money into this project, you might want to know that your access road is on private land that isn't for sale." I laid the documents on the table, the same ones Tommy had filed. "And without that road, you've got no way to move equipment in or out without trespassing." The lead developer flipped through the papers, frowning. "Jake, you didn't mention this." Jake stammered something about oversights and technicalities, but the developer didn't look convinced. I excused myself before dessert. By the time I got back to the farm, Martha was waiting on the porch. "How'd it go?" she asked. I smiled. Not wide, just enough for her to see the edge of it. Let's just say the table's tilting. A few nights later, Jake came by again. No suit this time, no smirk. He stood on the porch, hands in his pockets. "You think you've won," he said quietly. I met his eyes. "I think I'm still here." We stood there for a long moment, the cicadas buzzing in the dark. "You can't keep this up forever," he finally said. "Maybe not," I replied, "but long enough." And that was the standoff. Two men, father and son, looking at each other across a line that couldn't be uncrossed. The county called it a vision event. To me, it was a circus. They set up in my own front pasture. White tents, folding chairs, catered finger food. Renderings on easels showed the future of Wilcox Ranch in bright, artificial colors. Strangers strolled around like they already owned the place. And there was Jake, in a tailored suit, working the crowd like he'd been born for politics. He stood under a banner with my name on it, smiling for the cameras. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, taking the small stage, "we're here to celebrate progress. My father's legacy will live on in these homes and trails, even as we embrace tomorrow." People clapped. I stayed by the oak, hat low, arms crossed. When he stepped down from the stage, he came right to me, voice low enough for no one else to hear. 48 hours until the county signs the permits. In 60 days, you're gone. Should have taken my offer. He walked away with that victory stride of his, shaking more hands. I let him have his moment. He thought the board meeting in 2 days would be a formality. It wasn't. 2 days later, county board chamber. The developers sat at the long table, smiling like cats in cream. Jake sat at the center, his attorney Angela beside him. The room was full. Neighbors, press, county official. The chairwoman called the meeting to order. Item 7. Wilcox Ranch Development. Jake's people went first, talking about job creation, community benefits, eco-friendly design. A consultant showed slides of happy families walking along a creek I knew they'd drain dry. When they finished, the chair turned to the audience. Any opposing comments? I stood, hat in hand, and walked to the lectern. My voice carried. Name's James Arthur Wilcox. I've got 3 points before you vote. The room quieted. Point 1. The water rights for this land are in my name alone. They were never transferred when my son became co-owner. As of this morning, I've withdrawn my application to transfer them until all existing co-op obligations are fulfilled. Without water rights, this project has no supply, no taps, no landscaping, no build. Murmurs rolled through the room. The developers shifted in their seats. Point 2. The access road on your plans crosses a 5-acre strip along the creek. That parcel was bought by my father in 1971 and has never been part of the farm deed. Title's in my name. Without that road, you need a new route, new survey, and a new environmental impact study. That's at least 18 months, if you're lucky. Gasps now. The chairwoman scribbled notes. Jake's attorney leaned in, whispering fast. Point 3. A month ago, the auto payment stopped on a note secured by my son's share of this property. That note went into default. The bank sold it to a private party, me. As of this morning, I foreclosed on his stake. I now hold 100% ownership. The silence was heavy enough to hear the ceiling fans turning. The chair turned to Harold, the county clerk. Can you confirm? Harold stood from the second row. Recorded at 8:11 a.m. today. It's official. Jake's face went white. Angela muttered something sharp, but the chairwoman spoke first. Given this, the board cannot approve Item 7 as written. Because the foreclosure involved a public auction, we all spilled outside for the formality. Neighbors gathered, reporters set up cameras, and the trustee read the terms. Opening bid is the amount owed, he announced. I raised my hand. Credit bid the full amount. Any other bids? He asked. The developers whispered frantically, but without the water rights or access road, it was poison land to them. No one raised a hand. Going once, going twice, sold, the trustee said, striking the envelope with his palm. The cameras caught it, my old, scarred hand taking the papers. Jake stepped forward, voice low but shaking. You ruined me. I met his eyes, calm. No, son. You did that when you priced me. He had no answer. The developers were already walking away. When we reconvened, the chairwoman banged her gavel. Given the change in ownership, loss of access, and unresolved water rights, Item 7 is tabled indefinitely. Applause broke out. Small, but real. Neighbors clapped me on the shoulder as I passed. Jake sat frozen at the table, staring down. Outside, he caught up to me by the curb. "You cut me out completely." I shook my head. "No, you cut yourself out when you treated your home like a ledger." His voice cracked. "What happens to me now?" I let the question hang in the air until he shifted on his feet. "That depends on what you've got left that money can't buy." He looked away, didn't answer. I left him there, standing in the heat beside the truck that suddenly seemed too big for him. Back at the farm, Martha was waiting on the porch. "It's over?" she asked. "It's over," I said. And for the first time in months, I meant it. The weeks after the courthouse were quieter than I expected. No trucks kicking up dust in the driveway. No strangers taking photographs of my fields. No letters in official envelopes sliding into my mailbox. The hum of the farm settled back into its old rhythm. The sound of cattle lowing at dawn. The creak of the barn door in the afternoon wind. The steady chirr of cicadas after sunset. Jake didn't come around. Not right away. I heard bits and pieces through the grapevine. The developers had walked away entirely. Without the access road or the water rights, their investment had turned into a pit they didn't want to keep throwing money into. They'd sued Jake for breach of contract, and from what I gathered, he'd emptied most of his savings just to keep the lawyers from eating him alive. His downtown condo went on the market, so did the truck. Dallas, it seemed, wasn't as glamorous without a steady income. I didn't take joy in it, not the way some might think. Watching your own blood stumble is never a victory. But there's a difference between taking joy and taking peace. And I took peace in knowing the land was safe, the legacy intact, and the lesson, if he was willing, still within his reach. Martha noticed the change in me. She'd catch me standing on the porch in the evenings, just looking. "You seem lighter," she said one night, handing me a mug of coffee. "Feels like I can breathe again," I told her. 2 Sundays later, Jake finally showed. No truck this time, just an older sedan that rattled over the gravel. He got out slow, hands in his pockets. He looked thinner, worn down, the kind of tired that comes from more than missed sleep. We stood there for a moment, neither of us making the first move. Finally, he said, "I'm here to apologize. I didn't rush him. Let the silence do the heavy lifting. I thought I was helping," he said. "Or maybe I just wanted to believe that so I could get what I wanted without feeling like this." He gestured vaguely toward the fields, the house, maybe even me. I nodded once. "That's the thing about taking something you didn't earn. It never feels like it should." His eyes dropped. "I lost everything, Dad." "Not everything," I said, and left it there. I wasn't going to hand him some neat, easy redemption. Respect doesn't work that way. We didn't hug. We didn't shake hands. But he stayed for coffee, and we talked about small things, the cattle, the weather, a neighbor's new calf. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was a start. After he left, I walked down to the oak tree. The air was thick with the smell of hay, the sun bleeding out behind the horizon. I leaned a hand against the bark and thought about the day I'd stood in that driveway, staring at my son with papers in his hand. The humiliation, the betrayal. It was all still in there somewhere, but muted now, like an old scar that only aches when the weather turns. And I thought about my father, about that fishing trip by the creek. "Keep this land close," he'd told me. "One day, you might need it." Back then, I thought he meant for money. Now I knew better. He meant for grounding, for truth, for a reminder of who you are when people try to make you forget. That night, I sat at the kitchen table and wrote in my journal, something I'd been doing more since Martha came along. I wrote about how aging isn't just about losing strength. It's about gaining a longer view, about how the young think they can outrun the past. But the past always sets the pace. And I wrote this: "Respect is the rent we pay for the places we come from. You stop paying, you get evicted. Sometimes from land, sometimes from love." When I closed the book, the house was quiet. The kind of quiet that isn't empty, but full. The farm would outlast me. The trust would see to that. And maybe, if the wind was right, Jake would find his way back here for good. Not to take, but to tend. Either way, I'd done what I had to. I'd kept my promise to the ones who came before and to the ones who might come after. And as I turned out the porch light and stepped into the dark, I felt something I hadn't felt since this all began. Peace, deep and still, settling into the soil right alongside the roots. Because in the end, the land remembers who stands for it, and so does the truth. Well, that's the end of my story, at least for now. If you've made it this far, thank you for listening. I know some of you out there have walked your own road of betrayal, hard choices, and standing your ground. I'd like to hear about it. Share your thoughts or your own experience down in the comments. I do read them. And if this story spoke to you, go ahead and hit that like button. And make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss the next one. Until then, take care of what's yours, and it'll take care of you.